Welcome to True Reddit Reads. I'm your storyteller today, and maybe by the end of this story, you'll find yourself wondering, just how cruel can the real world be? I grew up in a place where tradition and family were nothing but a facade for the darkest things imaginable. A place where children like me, loaned children, were traded, sold, and exploited under the label of a blessing for the infertile. The story I'm about to tell isn't just a memory, it's a warning about a system that can turn children into commodities, turn whistleblowers into monsters, and turn justice into a bitter joke. If you think what you're about to hear is too horrific to be real, remember this: some secrets only survive because no one dares to speak them out loud. Chapter 1: The Borrowed Child. There are memories that keep coming back, haunting me every time night falls. These aren't just random nightmares, they're fragments of real memories pieced together from every time I was borrowed away from home. I remember vividly the day my mother sat and bargained with the buyer right in front of me. They talked about me like I was some sort of commodity, discussing price, quality, delivery time, all without paying attention to my eyes as I sat there on the floor. I was 4 years old then. Even at that age, I already knew that in the little village where I grew up, children like me were a source of profit. Especially the lone children, the ones without siblings, born just to be sent away on loan. My parents called it a blessing for childless couples, helping barren women experience the feeling of motherhood, while my family earned a bit more to feed everyone. It sounded like a noble deed, but everyone in the village knew kids who got borrowed like me rarely ever came back the same. The first time I was sent away was to Aunt Fatma's house, a woman who had tried to have a child for 10 years. She called me her mirror, made me drink some bitter herbal concoction mixed with cow dung every morning, saying it would pass on blessings. At night, all I could do was cry scratch myself until I bled and whisper my real name over and over, terrified that one day I'd forget who I was. By the time I was 7, I'd gone through plenty of loan contracts. Each family had its own set of obsessions. There was one family who made me sleep in the bed of their son, who had died 3 years before, made me wear his old clothes that still reeked of graveyard dirt. I even had to go to the cemetery, eat his favorite food, and pretend to be him on his death anniversary. Rashid's mother would cradle my face in candlelight, tears streaming down her cheeks, calling me Ahmed and forcing me to respond, "I love you too, Mom." If I didn't do it right, she would scream, her eyes wild with rage, and I would be terrified. But the worst of all had to be the Nurs family. They believed that children like me, alone with no siblings, were pure, untouched by the sins of their families. On every full moon, they would take my blood, just a small vial to bless the house, then mix it into the garden soil as a fertility charm. And so I became a child passed around from house to house, season to season. Whenever I made friends with another lone child, it was only a matter of time before my friend would suddenly vanish without a trace. I always wondered when my turn would come. Once I accidentally found the old diary of Selma, a lone child who lived with the Amars before me. The diary was hidden inside a hollowed-out Koran. In it, Selma wrote down everything, from the times the man of the house checked if her body had matured to how they planned to marry her off to a disabled son in the family. A lone child is the ideal bride, because no one asks questions or digs too deep, Selma wrote. The last page contained just a single line. Tomorrow they're coming to take me. If anyone reads this, remember I too was once someone's daughter. I couldn't sleep that night. That was when I realized I was living on borrowed time. If I didn't do something, I would eventually disappear just like the others. From that moment, I decided I wouldn't stay silent. I would do whatever it took to survive, and if I could, I'd leave a mark so that the next child to come would know they were never truly alone. Chapter 2: The Game of the Powerful. Maybe if I hadn't been a lone child, a kid with no siblings, my life would have turned out differently. But the older I got, the more I understood the strange value of my solitude. The adults in the village believed kids like me were easy to control, pure, with no one to protect us, and most importantly, no one daring to speak up if we vanished. By the age of 12, I'd become a familiar product to families big and small around the village. My parents had learned to raise my price, advertising me as premium, resilient, obedient, and tolerant. They bragged to the neighbors that I was helping the community, but in reality, it just meant they could buy another cow, fix the roof, or save up a dowry for my eldest brother. I knew by heart the habits, preferences, and obsessions of every family I'd stayed with. Some made me pretend to be the spirit of their dead son. Some took my blood in holy rituals. Some used me as a guinea pig for new medicines. There were even those who tested whether I was possessed by burning my skin with incense and watching how the burns healed. Every time I came home, I barely had time to change clothes and hug my old pillow before being dragged off to a new address. My parents never asked how I felt. They just counted the money, signed the contracts, and laughed at the fear in my eyes. I told myself if I was just a product, I'd at least be one that could protect itself. I started observing everything, memorizing every little detail, where they kept their keys, who stayed up late, who liked to listen to the radio, who was afraid of the dark, who usually went to the market early. I knew that to survive, I had to be smarter and quicker than them. Then one day, the idea for a broadcast, a secret transmission, came to me as I watched the head of one household tinkering with an old radio. I offered to help, pretending to be curious about the wires and circuits. Nobody expected a kid like me to assemble a tiny transmitter from junk I'd scavenged at the electronics market. I hid it inside the radio, tuning it so that just by turning it on during the afternoon prayer, the signal would go out. Warnings and secret messages started to slip into children's songs and prayer music, just enough for other lone children to catch. I secretly showed a few others how to make mini radios, taught them how to pick up the signals, and even how to encrypt messages. In the darkness, our tiny whispers began to spread through the village. Rashid's house will make you eat the offering tonight. Amars are having guests. Don't stay alone. If you see Amina, tell her she has a friend. At first, it was just words of comfort, but gradually, the network grew. There were kids I'd never met, but the trembling voices I heard over the radio proved they were still out there. It was the only way we could remind each other of our names, of who we were, whose child we belonged to, and that we were real people, not just things borrowed and forgotten. I knew that someday this game would be discovered, but at least before it was crushed, it had planted hope in the loneliest kids in the village. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone anymore. Chapter 3: The Diary of the Nameless Children. I don't even know when I started to lose the concept of home. Home for me was just a temporary shelter, a place to wait before being taken away. Every room I ever slept in, every bed I ever laid on, carried someone else's scent. The ashy smell of a lost child, the scent of blood mixed into the flower beds, the faint trace of tranquilizers on old tablecloths. All the children who were loaned out shared something in common. We learned to be silent, to endure, to survive by lying to ourselves. Once, while staying at the Amar's house, I discovered an old diary carefully hidden inside a hollowed-out Quran. Its owner was Selma, another lone child, almost a decade older than me, and she had vanished without a trace. Her diary pages were filled with terror, suffering, and despair. Tomorrow they'll check if I've become a woman yet. I'm scared. He said if I pass, I'll be allowed to marry their disabled son. Selma's final words were a message. If anyone finds this, please remember I was once someone's daughter. I once had a name. I clung to that diary for days as if it were a lucky charm. Reading Selma's handwriting, I realized a harsh truth. Kids like us could disappear at any moment, and no one but ourselves would even remember our names. From then on, I started recording everything that happened to me. Not to fight anyone, but to prove that I once existed, once loved, once feared once, had dreams. I hid my notebook inside the lining of my shirt, encrypted names, events, and even my own private symbols. Only I understood. Those secret recordings broadcast every afternoon at prayer time became a reminder not just for me, but for dozens of other children in the village that we are real. We have names, we have feelings, and we have the right to live and to be remembered. But the harder I tried to cling to those last shreds of humanity, the more my own parents and the families who borrowed me turned me into an obedient product. They praised me for being resilient, well-behaved, adaptable. They didn't know or pretended not to know that every scar every time I secretly sighed in the night was a silent curse I sent their way. And so I became a shadow, drifting through other people's childhoods, carrying the pain of generations of forgotten lone children, but I refused to fade away. I swore to remember every name, every fate, every unfinished dream of the children I met on this journey. Even if in the end all that's left of those memories are whispers through secret radio waves I will remember. And if I disappear, at least those whispers in the static will keep my name alive until the very end. Chapter 4: Survivors on the Radio Waves. I can't even remember the last time I was called by my real name. In every new family, I had a different name, a different identity. Ahmed, Amina, Yasmin. But I discovered something: children who were loaned out like me all shared the same fear and the same way to fight against being forgotten by remembering our names and each other's. It was from Selma's diary and the whispered stories in the night that the idea for a secret radio station was born. I took advantage of every chance I got to clean the TV, adjust the radio, or fix computers for the families, not because I was any tech whiz, but because I secretly assembled tiny transmitters and hid them in discreet corners of the house. With just a handful of old parts from the electronics market and some skills I'd picked up here and there, I created the first communication network for the lone children. Every afternoon at prayer time, when the loudspeakers drowned out every other sound, I'd slip in short news bulletins in a child's voice. Sometimes it was a warning about a child who'd been beaten. Sometimes it was a heads up that someone was about to be moved to a new house. Sometimes it was as simple as, "I'm Sarah, I'm 8 years old. Please remember my name." I taught the other children how to tune into the frequency, how to send messages using simple codes, even how to hide mini radios inside teddy bears or cookie tins. Gradually, the whole village started picking up on those ghostly whispers. The adults dismissed them as technical glitches, but the kids knew they weren't alone. Once a little girl just arrived at Rashid's house, heard my message, and burst into tears because for the first time in months, someone called her by her real name. Kids like me, even if we could only send each other a few fleeting minutes over the radio, still felt like we truly existed. We started leaving traces, secret symbols under tables, initials scratched onto bathroom walls, tiny folded notes wedged into door cracks. No matter what we reminded each other and ourselves, don't forget your name, because your name is the last thing you have left. But what I was doing couldn't fool the adults forever, those who saw us as obedient products. Once, while I was fixing an old radio at the Mahmoud's house, I got caught installing a strange device. The man of the house looked at me with cold eyes. "You think we're stupid, kid?" All I could do was bow my head, clench my teeth, and take the punishment. But behind my back, I still managed to send out one last message: "I'm about to disappear. If anyone can still hear this, please remember my name is..." Maybe in that moment I knew I had entered a battle with no way back. But I also understood as long as those radio waves kept echoing, even if only as faint sounds in the vast silence, the memory of us would survive, despite every scheme and cold-blooded contract made by the adults. And I silently prayed, if there was anyone out there truly listening, please remember the name of every one of us, so that one day When this story is told, no child will ever be just another nameless lone child. Chapter 5. The Price of Being Bought Out. I thought that the years of being loaned out, as cruel and cold as they were, had given me thick enough skin to face anything. But I was wrong. When the Mahmoods decided to buy me out, everything became harsher than anything I'd ever experienced. Unlike all the previous times I was lent away, this time there were no more fake soothing words, no candy, no kind mother smiles from child-hungry women. Instead, there were notarized documents, cash laid out on the table in front of me, and my birth mother's cold eyes bargaining as if she were selling an animal. I heard my mother's voice, clearly. "How much if the girl dies during the surgery?" She shrugged. "As long as you get the kidney, just deduct it from the price." I was stunned, unable to utter a single word. Nobody asked if I agreed. Nobody cared that I was shaking with fear. The Mahmoods didn't need a borrowed child to love. They needed a living source of organs for their own daughter, who was dying of kidney failure. Borrowed kids are for donating, family is for protecting. They explained it to me calmly, as if they were talking about a deal at the market. "Don't worry. You'll just fall asleep. You won't feel a thing." I was locked in a cold room, the windows sealed shut. The laughter and chatter of the family echoed from outside as if I didn't exist at all. The night before the surgery, I saw my own parents, arms full of cash, laughing and joking with the Mahmoods about good stock, about profitable investment. In that moment, I knew I was nothing more than a product past its expiration date, about to be carved up for whatever value was left. But what hurt me most wasn't the fear of losing my organs, but the raw truth. I had never once been seen as a child, as a person, not even for a moment. Within those four walls, I quietly wrote my last words on the bedsheet using blood from a finger I had bitten raw. My name is... I was ready for death. But I never expected that the secret radio network that I and the other lone children had built would become my lifeline. That night, a strange broadcast signal spread throughout the village. Every TV, radio, and computer played my recordings in my own voice, unedited, uncut. Every secret, every cold-blooded negotiation, every word about good stock, bought out, loaned, was laid bare for the entire village to hear. Those sounds pierced through the walls, cutting straight to the hearts of those who thought children like me would be silent forever. The door to my room burst open. Footsteps thundered, shouts, sobs, curses, all blended into a terrifying storm. For the first time in my life, I saw adults who were afraid, but what they feared wasn't their own guilt, it was the truth being exposed. And I knew from that moment on, whether I lived or died, I would never again be merchandise. Even if those radio waves go silent, my name, my story, and the stories of hundreds of other nameless children had been spoken out loud, becoming a truth no one could ever bury again. Chapter 6. Uprising, the Price of Defiance, and the Final Betrayal. I still remember the night everything exploded like a deep wound that never heals in my memory. When the Mahmood family planned to harvest my kidney, I knew there was no turning back, but I also knew this was my last chance to expose everything. From old electronics scavenged around the village, I secretly built a network of clandestine transmitters, one in every house, each borrowed child a voice of their own. That night, as the entire village celebrated the Harvest Festival, I activated all the devices at once. 53 radios, TVs, and computers simultaneously broadcast my recordings, conversations, and irrefutable evidence, from the bargaining voices of my own parents to the confessions of families who had abused, exploited, and even killed borrowed children. That sound rang out like a doomsday bell in the heart of the village. Adults, children, even those who thought themselves innocent, now realized how deeply guilt was woven into the blood and bones of this community. But the cruel truth was no one truly stood by me. The crowd quickly split into two sides. Those who had once borrowed or exploited me suddenly surged forward, arguing about who owned me at that moment as if I were nothing more than a market commodity. The host families scrambled to accuse one another of abuse in a bid to save their own reputations, while the village leaders were solely concerned with covering up the scandal, negotiating internally to keep the tradition of child lending hidden from the outside world. I became the common enemy, living evidence of every crime. Even the children who had once fought beside me were forced to turn their backs. Their families threatened them betray me, or your siblings would become the next merchandise. Some terrified cried as they were forced to lie, saying I was the instigator, the troublemaker, a threat. I still remember the desperate look in Marwa's eyes, the brave girl who once helped me set up the broadcasts. When her parents handed her the loan contract for her little sister Marwa, had to denounce me in front of the village, but she secretly pressed a map into my hand, showing where the last evidence was hidden. Even the young teacher, the one I believed would protect the children, quietly turned away when the village chief reminded her that her job and reputation depended on the community's approval. I was left utterly alone, desperate, and hunted. The host families colluded, turning all evidence against me. The recordings were cut and doctored, the diary pages forged, the medical records rewritten. I was painted as insane, destructive, a threat to the community. Every child I'd helped was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Those who remained were threatened with being loaned out if they dared to defend me. It reached its peak when I was forced to choose accept being committed to a mental institution with a diagnosis of personality disorder, or leave the village forever and remain silent about everything I knew. I knew if I were locked away, I'd never get another chance to reveal the truth. But if I left, no one would be able to save the children who came after me. In that moment of decision, I chose the most painful path. I burned all the remaining evidence, so no one could ever twist it to bury the truth. The fire blazed from the tiny shed. I'd once thought it was my last stronghold, incinerating all the records, recordings, and traces of the uprising. I stood in the center of the village, smoke stinging my eyes, realizing I had truly lost everything. Family, friends, allies, ideals, childhood. It all turned to ashes in a war with no victors. But what hurt most was knowing that even if I was erased, even if the tradition ever changed, there would always be more children like me continuing to live, to suffer, to disappear in the complicit silence of the entire community. Chapter 7. The System's Revenge. When justice is just an illusion. I don't know how I survived those days. It felt as if the whole world had turned its back on me, and I was just a shadow, drifting through alleys full of watchful, suspicious eyes. After the night the fire consumed all the evidence, all I had left was a ruined self, no family, no one to trust, no faith left in the miracle of justice. But I still hadn't given up completely. Even while being hunted, I was determined to expose those orchestrating the twisted child lending system. I tried every way I could to break into the Mahmoud's medical office, the very place where they had once planned to take my kidney. I knew there were records there, surveillance cameras, maybe the last piece of evidence that hadn't been destroyed. But this time, I had no allies. The children who had once stood by my side now chose silence to protect themselves and their families. Some, like Hassan, even became tools used to hunt me down in exchange for the promise of legal adoption and protection for their own little sisters from being loaned out. When I finally slipped into the storage room at the clinic, I stumbled upon contracts for lending children that dated back to before I was even born. Among them was my own mother's contract, complete with a photo of her pregnant with me, and detailed notes about the money she'd received. It was then I realized I was never a daughter, but an investment project from the moment I was still in the womb. But everything had been carefully prepared to counter me. Each time I found a new piece of evidence, the host families would immediately produce fake records, coerced or bribed witnesses. At a community meeting led by the village chief, I was dragged out like a criminal. They used my own words, actions, memories, even my diary, Everything that once empowered me, now twisted into proof of my supposed mental instability. Some of the children I'd once helped now stood on their side, looking at me with pity and fear. They had to do it to keep their families safe from retaliation. Marwa, my closest friend, held back tears as she publicly denounced me as an agitator, but secretly handed me a map to where the real records of missing children were hidden. All I could do was try to drag as many secrets as I could down with me. At one point, I even spread rumors about the village chief's affair to create chaos. His wife burned all the marriage and death records, inadvertently erasing traces of many disappeared children. But the community quickly stabilized, determined to stamp out any hope of rebellion. The host families grew more united than ever, agreeing to make an example of me to deter anyone who might challenge tradition. The one teacher who had once quietly helped now stood up at the meeting, openly turning her back and denouncing me for destroying the community's future. Even the law was no refuge. The regional judge was related to the village chief, and the prosecutor's daughter had just received a kidney transplant from a borrowed child. I was like prey hunted in a maze with no exit. I used to think that as long as I didn't give up, justice would come. But reality was far more bitter. Every effort to resist the system only made me more desperate, more isolated, turning me into a symbol of danger. People told stories about me like I was a curse, a troubled, destructive child who betrayed tradition. And suddenly I understood here justice was just an illusion to cover up crimes that had become traditional morality. My rebellion only made things worse, dragging others down with me. And then I had to face the biggest question of all. If everything is already lost, is there any reason left to keep fighting? I left the village with nothing but empty hands, a long scar on my body, and memories no one else would ever want to keep. Far away from the place I once called home, I now work at a child protection center in the city, listening to hundreds of stories, but none quite like the world I came from. Sometimes late at night, I still get a call, a child's whisper, "Please remember my name." Maybe I couldn't save everyone, maybe my rebellion failed, but if there's one thing I managed to hold on to, it's the memory of those names, those victims, those children who were never truly heard. Maybe justice never came, but the truth remains like a reminder that in a world where everyone wants to forget, sometimes all it takes is one person to remember for hope to survive, hope to